Good afternoon, everybody. Just to let you know, we are on the YouTube recording now. Well, welcome everybody to this meeting of the Development Plans Panel, and my name is Councillor Caroline Gruen and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being live streamed on the City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. And could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves, if we could start on my left.
My name is Martin Elliott. I'm Head of Strategic Planning.
Hello everybody, I'm Katie Dye, Councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft, and I'm substituting for Councillor McKenna today.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Javid after Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Hi there, Councillor Hannah Bithell, Kirkstall Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carlin Farsley Ward.
Hello, I'm Paul Bingham. I'm a team leader in strategic planning.
Good afternoon, Heather Davis, Principal Planning Officer.
Hello, I'm Richard Marsh, Principal Nature Conservation Officer.
Good afternoon, I'm Caroline Harris, Planning Assistant for Policy and Plans.
Good afternoon, Ian Mackay, Team Leader, Policy and Plans.
Hi, I'm Helen Miller and I'm a Principal Planner in the Policy and Plans team.
Good afternoon, Rena Saran, Climate Change and Energy Officer for the Council.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Alan Lamb, substituting for Councillor Andrew Carter.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adam Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Nicole Walker, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer.
Thank you very much, everybody. Toby, could I ask you please to run us through the first 5 items?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there are no items which would require the exclusion of the press and public. Under item number 3, there are no formal late items, but supplementary information was circulated to members prior to the meeting, and that was Appendix 2 for item 7. Under item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interests? And item number 5 is apologies. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Campbell, Councillor McKenna, Councillor Hayden and Councillor Finnegan and Councillor Carter. And we have Councillor Lamb substituting for Councillor Carter and Councillor Dye substituting for Councillor McKenna. And I believe we're just waiting on Councillor Kaylee Brooks as well. Thank you. Oh, you're here.
Thank you very much indeed. And can I thank colleagues who are substituting today? It's much appreciated. Thank you. So on to item 6, which is the minutes, and I'll pause on each page and please may I take matters arising and accuracy together. So they start on page 5 of your 838 page pack. So page 5, anyone who want to raise anything? Page 6, page 7. Page 8, page 9, and the final page of the minutes, page 10. No, can I assume that's an accurate record for those who attended, please? Thank you. And so we go on now to item 7, which is the local plan update. Martin, did you want to come in?
Just do a matter arising from the minutes? Is that
You
okay?
can.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of a matter arising from the previous paper that came to you on biodiversity net gain, within that paper there was an indication that the council was looking to set up what's known as a habitat bank and progress the detail of that through to executive board. That executive board meeting was due to have happened in September, but for a number of reasons we've paused that. The chief reason is because we've written to DEFRA to seek clarity on a particular line of the legislation within the Environment Act that causes us a bit of concern legally around the operation of a habitat bank. And we're waiting on And I think it's not just us. I think it's many other local authorities across the country waiting on some confirmation in terms of the detail around that before we progress. But there's still an intent to work on that habitat bank. And at the moment, we're looking at alternatives and ways around that. So hopefully we can bring something to Executive Board over the next few cycles. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Any comments on that? So that's noted. Item number 7, the local plan update. Just to say by way of introduction, because there is so much material here, we don't intend to go through it line by line. We've put some of the issues in the papers that we think will interest you most and that you probably have most to say about, and the officers will present on those areas. But of course, anybody can raise anything they wish from the papers that you have in front of you. So I'm going to hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to bring this paper to Development Plan panel members this afternoon. It represents what is really quite an ambitious suite of revised policies within the local plan document that really seek to implement the council's key objectives around net zero, but also around inclusive growth and health and well-being. Because as we know, a lot of the built development quality and a lot of the way we move around the city and a lot of the way that we protect nature and the environment in the city directly feed into those 3 key pillars. So members should be very familiar with this suite of policies. And they've been subject to 2 key rounds of consultation previously, where we've had really positive and good engagement from representatives throughout the city. But we're now at a stage where just before we submit this to the Secretary of State and just before they appoint an independent inspector to scrutinise this material, we're going out for one final round of consultation to address and deal with some of the key issues that were raised through those previous rounds of consultation. And I'll go through those issues in a minute, but this is just to say that this final round of consultation is naturally going to be quite discreet, where we're focused on specific changes to the document. So just moving on to the next slide, if I can. There we go, that's better. Okay, so I thought it would be helpful just to start off with what you've got in front of you today. Obviously, the report sets out in summary the policies of the plan and how they're proposed to be changed. You've then got at Appendix 1, you've got a track change version of what was previously consulted upon, and you've got a version with those track changes removed. So if an inspector was inclined to accept everything that the council was proposing to them, that's what the plan policies would look like. You've then got as Appendix 2, the main consultation document, which is being presented as a schedule of track change so that representatives are very clear as to what they can comment on at this stage and what they can't, but albeit with documents to enable them to see the wider picture of the plan. You've then got some legal documents that we have to prepare that help inform and help develop the policies. The first in Appendix 3 is the sustainability appraisal, which checks that the changes that we're making are appropriate when we look across a wide range of objectives that we're trying to seek within the plan, be they economic, be they social, or be they environmental. We've then got a habitat regulations assessment at Appendix 4, and that has and that's due to be changed. And I'll cover that later on in the report when I talk about the comments that Natural England have made to the plan. We've then got a rather large document which attests to the quality and the extent of comments that we've received in, and that's the report of consultation at Appendix 5. Now that sets out in detail the consultation activities that the council has engaged in. It also sets out in summary the consultation responses we've received and our response to those and whether they elicit a change or not to the material. And we've then got as Appendix 6 a duty to cooperate statement, which again is another legal test which the council needs to engage within its neighbouring authorities, but also prescribed relevant bodies such as the Environment Agency in terms of positive and continuous engagement throughout the process. So those are the documents in front of you today. As the chair said, we're just going to focus in on the key changes that we think we want to draw your attention to. The first is around policy EN1B. Now, policy EN1B is almost like the net zero building policy. This is about, well, what sort of buildings are we expecting to be built in Leeds from the adoption of this plan that help us reduce carbon and help us meet our net zero targets. The policy was pretty challenging and pretty ambitious as it was first prepared in the plan. It went far beyond not only current building regulations, but also future home standard building regulations. And it wanted to get to a position of operationally net zero buildings way before the national government were seeking to do so. It sought to do that by introducing metrics around energy use intensity, which is basically looking at the amount of energy used per square metre to annually heat and power a home. And through using those metrics, which have also been used in quite forward-thinking authorities such as London and elsewhere, you would then automatically result in a reduced level of carbon use of the building. And I think the key thing in terms of using that was there was a real focus on trying to bring those energy use intensity targets down through things like the fabric of the building and through what's called passive measures, such as the orientation of the building. Now, we're still keeping those energy use intensity targets, but on hearing from a wide range of developers and their consultants, and through having sort of detailed discussions with architects and people who are actually out there trying to deliver these ambitions, we did get a lot of feedback that this was too much too soon. And from two perspectives, that would cause us a problem. The first is that developers, despite this being a national issue and despite this being a local emergency, weren't yet geared up for these policies to hit from day one of the plan. And the second point is around feasibility, in that we still need, it is felt, to allow some time for developers to change their supply chains and move from things like gas boilers to air source heat pumps, and make sure that the right supplies of these materials are in place to enable the policy to be delivered. We felt that if we'd carried on with the policy as it was, it would have raised soundness issues around its effectiveness in terms of being able to be delivered from day one. So what we've done is we've listened to those concerns and we've introduced a transition arrangement into the policies, which will kick in from December to 2027. And so that there is a slightly less ambitious energy use intensity targets to get developers used to these targets from adoption of the plan, which we're hoping will be from sort of late 2024. But also less of a requirement to meet any carbon that hadn't been reduced through the building through offsetting. So there was an opportunity through the policy to give a commuted sum payment, if you like, for the carbon that wasn't managed to be reduced within the building. What we've done is we've not introduced that immediately, because our viability testing tells us that actually, whilst places like London, and actually it's worth saying to members that London has a policy similar to this, but that doesn't necessarily result in all of the buildings being built in London being operationally net zero. What it does result in is a lot of developers paying the offsetting charge in order to offset what they've been unable to achieve through their buildings. So within Leeds, which has a very different market to London, it seems appropriate for us to not push the viability of developments through this particular planning route so far so soon, But what we will do is we will expect that to happen from January 2028, once the industry and once developers have had time to understand, get to grips and plan for that properly. And they tell us that they do need time to do this. So we've listened and we've amended the policy accordingly. These slides are just detailing the two energy use intensity targets that we will implement. Now, if members have any questions on this, then I'm happy to take them. But also, we've got officers in the room that can also deal with this. So the second, would you like me to stop?
Yes, I'm just
and deal with that
suggesting
one first,
because they are fairly complex ideas and there are a lot of them, whether you would prefer to comment and question in between. Yeah, I thought so. I saw Councillor Anderson first, and then I think I saw Councillor Lamb, and then I saw Councillor Biffle and then Councillor Dye. So
Right.
Councillor Anderson.
Number of points. One is, I've had to put up with a lot of criticism in the last week or so based on what the government has said from members of this administration. Now they're doing exactly what they criticised Rishi Sunak for doing. So you can't have it both ways. That's the political comment. But the more general comment is that what this will mean is that we're going to have a lot of properties that need to be retrofitted, even more properties that will need to be retrofitted. And is there no way we can get the developers to pay into a fund that we could then draw down in order to retrofit the houses that they are, because of the way you're changing your policy, to at least enable us to retrofit those houses, because otherwise we're going to have that problem. If we gave them 3 years, if they can't change their policies within 3 years, they're not good businesses. They should be dynamic enough businesses to be able to change their practices within 3 years. That's taking it to 2026. So there is no reason at all why they cannot, because if everybody's doing it, if everybody's asking for it, then everybody has to change, and as do the providers of the materials. We are now, again, the LGA are arguing, now that it's under new political stewardship, are arguing that everything should be local led. Well, if the view of people locally, as in the administration locally, is that we need to aspire to get things done, then we should be showing leadership in doing that. And then the final thing is clarity on this 2028. Is it all approvals after January 2028 that would apply, or is it any houses built after January 2028? Because let's be honest, those of us who've been around for a while know it will take them at least 2 years to build out any planning permissions they get in 2028. So it'll probably be nearer 2030 by the time. So that's why it's important, because then you've got another 2 years of more retrofit houses being built. And so in Leeds, we're talking about what, 3,500, 4,000 houses, whatever it is per annum. So if we wait till 2030, that's 7 years. That's almost getting close to 30,000 houses we are not going to have been retrofitted. Although, having said that, there will be some developers who will do it, voluntarily doing it, because some of us who've been at seminars in the past have met some of those developers who would argue that you can do it immediately and are happy to do it immediately, and they can still get products done. So I know that's a bit of a tour, but I'm not happy.
Martin.
So thank you for those questions, Councillor Anderson. I think the first thing I'd say is the policy as amended here in front of you, we wouldn't anticipate retrofitting being needed if this policy were implemented as it stands, because and it is complicated, but the policy will still encourage the orientation of the building, the fabric of the building, the bits of the building that assist in keeping the house warm and needing less energy to be built. It's really around how the home is powered, when the grid decarbonizes, because when the grid decarbonizes, these energy use intensity target, the net zero part of this policy is much easier to attain, because no matter how you're heating a home, powering a home, it's coming from decarbonized energy sources. Okay, so it is really tied up with the subtleties around those aspects. And you've heard, I think, us talk before around getting to kind of 90% sort of net zero is reasonably easy. It's that last 10% that's really difficult. This is that last 10% that we're talking about here. So I'm not anticipating that there will be a need to retrofit. I think with this policy, which is also significantly beyond where government building regulations currently and are projected to go sit. So I think the council can say it is being ambitious in terms of current government policy and within this revised policy. So I don't think it's either adding to a future retrofit bill or delivering in any way poor quality development. It's actually delivering significantly higher in terms of net zero and energy use. And yes, it would apply to all approvals after January 2028. So whilst they may take time to build out, there would be an expectation that from sort of 2030 onwards, the development in Leeds would be fully net zero using the upper part of the policy.
I'm conscious that we only have a couple of hours at this and we could probably debate this point forever, but do you want to make a brief? No, okay.
I mean, if I'd come out of that reverse argument, you would have laughed me out at home, because otherwise, if it hadn't been that much, you would never have changed the policy. If based on your logic, where you say it's actually not going to make a material difference, you would have introduced it from day one. The only reason you're amending it is because it does make a material difference to our policies. I mean, irrespective of whether I'm right or not, you can't say that it isn't going to have an effect on our development. And so that, but anyway, just park it. Don't bother answering.
I think Martin does want to say something, so I will ask him to come.
I will come back, Councillor, because I want to make sure that all members of this panel understand the point. And a lot of this is around a policy that would otherwise have achieved net zero by allowing developers to offset. And that's how a lot of these policies that are badged as net zero policies are actually getting through, by offsetting. What we can't do in Leeds, because of our particular market characteristics, is introduce that policy at this stage, because it at the moment it wouldn't be affordable. We'd have to work up to it. But what we can do is we can get as near as we can, and then we can, the transition won't require that offsetting payment to be made, but after the transition it will. The home and the building won't look any different, but the theoretical assessment of that building's carbon and its energy use will, because of things like the offsetting payment and increasing decarbonisation of the grid.
Okay, let's move on. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Anderson asked one of my questions, but it wasn't answered. So it was, when does this apply to consents granted or homes built?
Sorry, Councillor, I thought I did, because I said all approvals after January 2028, which would enable then built development from 2030 onwards to be built to these higher standards.
So just, well, sorry if I missed that. Just by way of follow-up, how do we deal with a rush of applicants before the hard deadline?
I think it's a fair point, Councillor, but in my experience, developers will seek permission for what they can deliver with any certain point in time, what they've got the capacity to deliver and what they think the market will absorb. I don't think we'll see a particular change in that. We certainly, when we've introduced policies in the past that have sought to sort of ratchet up things like affordable housing contributions, for example, we've not necessarily seen a rush of developments seeking to get in before the wire, if you like.
Councillor Biffle?
Thank you. I was also similarly going to ask the same question, so I wonder if actually there could be some wording added for clarity. The other question was, in terms of the last resort element, whether there's anything a little stronger that we can use wording wise there, in that we see at the moment with the current policy, the green space is a similarly worded sort of last resort. You can offset your green space contribution using the section 106. And actually we see quite regularly that that's the case. So in order to avoid ending up in the most stuff being offset that you just spoke about around London, is there any stronger wording we can use to make it a really, really, really last resort? But obviously that's not policy language.
I think that's a fair point, Councillor Bithell. And I think the way the policy is written is that there is a hierarchy that the developments will need to go through, which starts with passive design principles, then goes on to maximising renewable energy on site, then goes on to ensure that on site sort of cooking and heating is fossil fuel free. So then there will be a series of checks and balances that we will have when we both validate and interrogate planning applications to make sure that the developer's gone through all of this before we then understand what the resulting energy use intensity performance of the buildings are, and can then take that into account in terms of the determination. So I think there's quite a few checks and balances in the way that we're seeking to assess these developments. We can certainly look at, I mean, we've talked about applications also needing to be supported by energy statements. So we can provide guidance about what those energy statements should be and should look like, which will ultimately again enable us to have more control so that they're not jumping to the end, which I think is your concern. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Dye.
Yes, well, all the things on my list have pretty much been ticked off. I'm definitely not in favour of a transition period, but the only thing that's left in terms of a question really is, if one of the issues is skills development, we need to do a big piece of work on that. I know that that's happening at various levels, but that has to be a priority.
Thank you, Councillor Dye. Do you want a response to that? Yeah.
I just to say, Councillor Dye, I fully accept that. And sometimes there are things that are outside planning's direct control that need to happen for planning to be able to implement what it wants to. But the inclusive growth strategy, for example, does start to sort of talk some of that language around the need for looking at sort of sectoral support and skills development. And obviously, I think as a city council, we'll do as much as we can to help support that.
I mean, I think on that, if ever, I'm always banging on about cross-service working and co-working and collaborating. And if ever there was a piece of work that required that, this is definitely it. And I really do think as a council, we need to get our fingers out in terms of working with partners, with developers, with other providers, with people who can trade, with people who have the skills. We're not brilliant at that across the council, and I think we need to get a lot better, would be my view. Councillor Carlew.
Thanks, Chair. What I'm trying to get an understanding of here is all the different issues that face into it, because I'm wondering whether we can't be a bit more detailed in how we cover a required transition period. There are some things we can control and some things that we can't control. One of the things we can't control is the work going on with the grid, because that is bigger than us. That's fine, and I'll accept that. Maybe that's, I've never criticised you, Barry, because I think you're way ahead of where your government are on this, but maybe that's down to some of the lack of preparedness that we have had over this issue for many years and decades, I guess we could say. that's the deadline that leads that. But the grid is one aspect of it. And I would have thought we could have worded a policy around something around that, because that isn't within the developer's control. But in the same way, when I'm dealing with transport, I say the only thing we have to worry about is getting everyone on the bus. And within a certain time period, all those buses will be electric and will be net zero. There must be a point at which we can arrange this. So is there no point in the transition period where we can ensure that by 2030, the building will be net zero, even from now? That doesn't seem to be what's specifically mentioned here, but obviously we're putting something in 2028, fine. But if the grid is an issue, and if the availability of certain skills is an issue as well, is there nothing we can put in that would say by 2030 it would have to be net zero, regardless of what we allow them to do for the 4 years before, so that we have that certainty that they're not adding to the budget by 2030? I guess that's one clarity. The other point, I guess, that is my concern in this is how much does this use up of the carbon budget until 2030? And how much of that have we factored in? We've got enough existing housing that we need to deal with without additional housing and buildings adding on to that. And how's that calculation been worked out?
Yeah, that last one's really challenging, because carbon accounting is something that I still think is in its infancy. So it's I don't have an answer to that, but I can certainly go back and have a think about that. But I think what we're saying here is from January 2028, all development will be net zero through virtue of meeting these challenging energy use intensity targets and being able to offset some of that carbon for use in retrofit projects within the city. If members feel that it shouldn't be 2028, if you feel it should be, that's too long, then fine, we can take that away. And to be fair, developers didn't tell us what transition they wanted. We asked them a lot. And we really sort of said, well, what are your perfect conditions? What are the conditions that are going to enable you to do this? And that wasn't an easy conversation with them. So where we are is giving developers 3 years to 2028, which will enable the large amount of the development that's delivered post 2030 to be built to the higher standards. Now, if we could have said January 2027, which with 3 years to deliver a planning application would mean that everything from January 2030 would be to the higher standard. In terms of the other aspects of your question, we can look at the supporting text to try and contextualize why the policy now says what it says around the overall carbon budget and this link between energy use intensity and net zero, because I know that's quite a difficult thing to explain. So we can certainly look to the supporting text to do that.
You don't look happy, Councillor Carley. Would you like to come back?
I think I'm just trying to understand exactly on it, and maybe I can put my question clearer. So if I built something in 2026, I guess the aim of what I'm trying to get through is the fact that if we put something in 2026 and the grid decarbonises, it could be net zero as soon as it is possible for it to be so. But what is there in here that therefore requires that development to be built in such a way that everything it is putting in is on a path to decarbonisation? So requiring no, I know there's the fossil fuel part on that, but therefore the only factor in it being decarbonisation would then be the externalities outside the developer's control. Does that make sense? Because yeah, if we build a building tomorrow and hook it up to the grid, the only energy use is electric, and we try and reduce as much that energy use that's needed off-site as possible, then it will be net zero as soon as is possible for within their own control. And is that what this policy will do? So if the grid is decarbonised entirely by 2029, let's say, will all of the developments that start as soon as this first policy, not the transition period, come into place, will all of those be in effect running at net zero operational?
Yes, in theory. The grid decarbonisation is one of a number of different things that will lend itself to whether the building is ultimately net zero. But the grid decarbonisation is in a sense a bit separate from the energy use intensity, because the energy use intensity is encouraging better use of energy, better use of heat. So the policy still encourages that fabric first approach. It also encourages on-site renewables. What this policy will enable, particularly in areas like the city centre fringe, and where we're expecting higher density development, where roof space doesn't lend itself to putting lots of solar panels on it, those sorts of developments would, prior to national grid decarbonisation, have had to have relied on an offsetting route to become net zero. Yeah. What the policy says is, just because you're building a very tall, high building, we won't burden you just yet with that offsetting expense, because we know you can't put enough solar panels on the roof. But what we do want you to do is make sure that the building itself meets the energy use intensity targets, so that the high rise that we're getting in Leeds is as energy efficient and people's bills are as low as they possibly can be. And that won't have to be retrofitted. Is that clearer?
That makes it the very short extra bit to that. To all granted, let's say they can generate 98% of their energy they need. What is the requirement for that 2% of energy that they may need to get from external sources to have to come from something that is on a path to decarbonisation, so that we know that that building, so that it is connected to the grid or something like that, rather than something separate, so that we know it will definitely at some point be automatically net zero. Does that make sense? They can't control the externalities, but we can ensure that it is connected to the grid for whatever they need extra, because we know there's a path there. What we don't want them to do is to use an additional fuel source that, or an additional energy source that is not on a path to decarbonisation in some way. Does that make sense?
I think the answer to your question is the promotion of on-site renewable energy, the resistance to fossil fuel energy and heat generation on the site, and the grid ultimately decarbonising. So I think it's reducing the energy needs of the building, reducing the heating needs of the building, maximising renewable energy and heat, maximising air source heat pumps, which are non-fossil fuel, and reducing fossil fuel energy and heat generation on the site, awaiting grid decarbonisation. But what I will do is I will look at Raina Saran, who's had some involvement in this policy, and just ask Raina, is that correct?
Yes, that's completely correct. However, what we're not doing also, maybe that helps answer your question, is we're not offsetting whatever is being relied on electricity, because we know that eventually it is going to be decarbonized. But what we don't want to do is add the load to the decarbonization of the grid as well. So hence the need for the lower energy use intensity standards and such. Does that answer? Thank you.
I'll bring you in a moment, Councillor Lamb. I'm going to ask a much simpler question, probably embracing all of those points. The way I came to this was, initially, I was just as disappointed as Councillor Anderson at the apparent climb down. It didn't feel right. And then as I considered it more carefully, I thought, well, I suppose setting off in a direction that you then can't achieve is not a good idea either, and that we needed to find a way through. And if it lands you in the same place at the same time as the original intention in 2030, is it a more logical way of doing it? So my question, in a much simpler term than Councillor Carlill's question was, will it land us where we should have been initially in 2030? Will the result be the same?
The result will be significantly more net zero buildings in Leeds from 2030, built to a higher standard than we know that government intends building control standards to be in 2030.
Right.
So in terms of the Leeds Climate Commission pathway, we will still be on that pathway of ambition within this city before the government's net zero pathway, or what was the government's net zero pathway when it a couple of years ago.
I'll just ask it in a slightly different way, because I think that's answered my question. If we had gone as we initially intended to without a transition period, would we end up in a better place by 2030 or not?
In all honesty, I think if we'd gone where the initial policy was, I think we would have come under significant fire examination. And I think we would have not shown an inspector that we had listened to concerns of the development industry who are building these properties. And I think it is important to reflect on the points that they're making to us. So I think we go into an examination now better armed with greater justification for these highly ambitious policies that shows that we've listened and we've amended. So we are more likely to get an adopted plan as a result of these pre-submission changes.
I'll just ask one final question. Sorry to keep members waiting. Do you feel that if the committee today asked us to reduce the transition period by a year, would you be okay with that? Would you feel that was achievable?
I think if that was the strong feeling of the panel, I think it makes logical sense, because it ensures that everything that has planning permission from the 1st of January 2027, if it takes 3 years to build it, it is being built to the net zero council aspirations by 2030. So I think that makes justifiable sense. And I think that given that developers have not told us what transition they want, I think it's appropriate for us to set the transition that makes best sense and is justifiable to us. So yes, it would be.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I think probably like all, I'm sat here with a generally open mind on these things, and I may be changing it as we go. The bit I try and put myself in is if we're sat in a plans panel in a practical sense, in whether that's 2025 or 2026, and you find yourself where the technology has moved forward faster than we expected, and the ability to do this has arrived faster than people fear. I've heard a lot of words like encourage and promote, which I don't like as a policy strategy, because we can encourage developers to do all kinds of things, and if they don't have to, they won't do it. And equally, I have a concern post 2028 so it's not viable, and we'll be getting viability arguments back at us. It's the outcome that matters, and I'm not sure quite that we're there in terms of the policy language to deliver the outcome that we want. I don't think anyone disagrees with the outcome we're trying to get to. It feels like we've diluted it somewhat with the proposal, and I think what we all want is a policy suite that we can hold developers to, not one that we can encourage them to do.
Martin, do you want to come back on that one first?
If I may, yes. I mean, I would share Councillor Lamb's concerns if the language was encouraged, but the language is must. The language in the policy is all development must, and that's quite strong planning language. So I'm confident that that is sufficient for us to very strongly implement this policy, and give members at development panels the ability to implement these policies.
I get, once the policy is in after 2028, that's fine. Before that, we can only encourage and promote, and we may be in a position where we could be it could be deliverable.
Sorry, Councillor Lamb. The policy will be implementable before 2028 or 2027 if members wish it to be earlier, because it says up to the 31st of December 2027, all new developments must. And then it sets out that hierarchy of on-site renewables, passive design, fabric first, and a set of energy use intensity targets that must be met. Now what it then does after that transition is jump up those energy use intensity targets and require an offsetting contribution if they can't be met. So the must will apply from the point of adoption of this plan. So from the point of adoption of this plan, it will be better than building regulations or where the Future Home Standard seeks to go. So it is quite a strong and ambitious policy in that sense.
You know, some of my concerns are about the transition period, in that we're expecting developers to grow in their knowledge and skill set and to apply better practices over a period of time rather than immediately. I get that. Is there any way that we can systematically sample whether they are in fact taking the strides forward that we need them to take?
I think that's a really good idea, Chair. And what I'm keen to do is to do some detailed post-decision monitoring and some post-construction monitoring. Because I think the way this should work is that if a developer does it once, they shouldn't necessarily do it differently on other schemes. I don't think it would be within their interests to apply different standards to different schemes. So what I would like to do is accompany this policy with an implementation strategy that's about monitoring, so that we know whether a developer is likely to be giving us a better quality development. And some of those developers are already doing that with things like Barratt and their Z homes, etc.
Let's move on, shall we? Or the afternoon will never end.
On this date thing, a major development of 1,000 houses that gets planning permission in 2027, right? So at the moment, they can do it so far up to the 1st of January. Have they then got an exemption to bringing it up to the higher standard as it takes them to build out the whole of the 1,000 houses, which might take them 10, 20 years in which to build those particular houses out, depending on what speed they do it. It just, the date, what I'm trying to stop, to what I'm trying to get is bringing it in as quick as we possibly can. No ifs, no buts, no maybes, no arguing that they can't afford to do it or the technology is not there, because if they can't get the technology in by then, you know, there are solutions, because developers are doing it just now. There are some developers doing it just now. So there's no reason why the other developers can't follow to the same. Might cost them more, might have less profit, but, you know, everyone's got to do the bit. So what happens with the 1,000 development that's been given permission in 2027, irrespective of whether we go for 27 or 28, that they could take them 10 years in which to build it out?
Yeah, I think that is an issue, Councillor Anderson. But we would need to look at how we could condition the implementation of the policy. But ultimately, if a developer goes in for a grant of outline or full permission, it has to be based on the policies that are adopted at that time. What we could do is we could write into the justification, the supporting text, we could think about some wording that we could put in to try to sort of deal with that situation arising, and have a conversation with our legal colleagues in terms of how that can be implemented. But it is an issue, but ultimately, yeah, we'd have to think about where those sorts of development are likely to come from. Yeah,
I think rate and speed of manufacture might be an issue, actually. I don't know that. I think it may be. So these things all do need taking into account and thinking about. I was going to say Hannah, Councillor Biffle.
Thank you. Just to aid my understanding, actually, is it not exactly the same as the situation we're in now, whereby any houses that are getting planning permission now will have to adhere to the standards that they're getting planning permission for now, rather than the bit that's up to 2027. So whenever we put it in, there's going to be a lag, because for the next 10 years, there could be the ones being built on this. This isn't going to amend that. It's just going to be a continuation, right? Thank you. Just checking.
Final contribution on this issue, Councillor Carlile.
Sorry, Chair. I know we're going on around this, but I think there's a couple of oddities in this. The one thing I will come back to, because people sat with me on the airport one and we had a long time, anyone that was in that particular one of this conversation, there is a set carbon budget that every area must fit. The later we delay properties being net zero operationally and the build of them, then the higher the world warms and the more of the carbon budget we use by 2030. And that means we have to find that from somewhere else, that saving that we need to get to. And that is the difficulty here. And that's what I'm trying to understand. So I completely understand that were we looking at a development today and saying it had to be net zero operationally, and they must factor in the whole life carbon of a development built right today, and we were saying that that had to be done, for instance, let's say that was adopted policy, then viability would come up every single time and it wouldn't get done. I am willing then to accept that there is a period of time people need. The difficulty then comes on to how has the date been worked out? So if there is a very complicated set of work that's been done that says, here's when we'll have all the skills, here's when the externalities will be done, that's fine. But I just don't know, are we going to end up with them doing nothing for 18 months and then having a 6-month run, and then we still have the viability questions on the 1st of January 2028? That's the real difficulty, and it's finding that date. I completely understand that you've got to sit in front of an inspector and bring this through, but as you said, developers haven't given us this date. So we've responded, and I'm just trying to work out whether our response is proportionate. I am movable from immediately as soon as we go in, but I would want to see some solid evidence of why we're putting it at a certain time frame. And we can generate some of the requirements around skills and such for this from this policy. I know that does take time, but I'd rather have a calculated time that it says, rather than we just set a date in the sand.
Just to reply to that, and to be really clear, developers won't be doing nothing once this plan is adopted. They'll be having to face a series of quite challenging policies to deliver development that is much better quality than they've delivered before, and they're already we will get objections about the transition period, because they will say it's too hard, because it goes beyond where current building control and building regulations takes us. So if we're thinking about a proper transition, we start from a period in this authority where we've already looking to build beyond building regs. We've had that since 2014. We're maintaining that. We're saying, as building regs ratchet up, we still want you to do better than building regs. And then through this energy use intensity aspect of the policy, we're saying, give real attention to how these homes are heated, how they're powered, and you can resolve that through fabric, through passive design, and through on-site renewables. Now, if you've got a development that maxes out its on-site renewables and builds to the fabric efficiency we want them to build to, it's likely they'll pretty much be there even during the transition period. The transition period is helping those developments that can't get there through on-site renewable infrastructure, for example, and therefore would otherwise have relied on sort of offsetting as a means to deliver net zero, as well as introducing sort of the energy use intensity targets in a bit of a stepped approach. So So this is still highly ambitious. In terms of counting the sort of the carbon lost or the carbon that's still being generated, that's incredibly difficult. And I've spent the last sort of 2.5 years trying to work out a way of doing that and talking to academics and lots of other interested parties. And I haven't really been able to find a way to actually capture that on a development by development basis, because it does depend on the site specifics. It does depend on the specifics of the energy statement and the calculations that are being made on each and every application, which is why it's so important that we have somebody working within the planning department who can actually understand those calculations and help inform the plan and permission process.
So having heard all that we've heard on this issue, would anyone want to propose shortening the transition period? Peter?
I think the only thing I'd say on it is there's not really the evidence behind it. I completely appreciate, Martin, and completely get it. As soon as this policy comes in, and we enter the transition period, it'll be better than where we are now. But I think members have been very happy that what we were seeking was the best that we could possibly get. And I don't want us to move away from that. You're in a risk game and you're working out where this looks like an inspector and you're weighing up that risk. Members can choose for themselves, I guess, where they'd rather that risk be. And we've thought differently about it as individual members on different schemes, I'm sure. I'm just imagining myself, as Councillor Lamb was earlier, sat in City Plans panel with this, and it all looks like a very woolly 6-hour discussion to me on something where previously we had a very simple 15-minute defer this and send it back for better discussion. And that is my real concern. It is those words, yeah, the encourage, the I think there's something that would probably give me more reassurance in there, and I'm not quite sure what it was. It may be something that explains more what we're going through in this, and that development will do the best it can do at that given time, and that's the thing I want to ensure. But I'm not quite sure we've got wording that requires that, and I can imagine seeking legal advice many times at City Plans panel and having to get a response on those points, which I never like doing. I would rather we're in a very clear position beforehand.
Okay, Martin, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So having sort of scrutinised the policy again, may I make a suggestion that where it says up to the 31st of December 2027, all new development must, if that were to say up to the 1st of January 2027, all new development must. And the second thing then is after it's set out the passive design, the on-site renewable, and ensure the fossil fuel free development, it currently says in order to achieve the above, applications will be expected to meet. Would members be comfortable if we took out the words be expected to, and the policy said we'll meet the following transitional energy use intensity targets?
Is that a helpful suggestion, members? Yeah, it's making it more precise, isn't it? So I think that's a yes, Martin. That would go down well. Councillor Biffle.
Thank you. It feels like this is kind of two-sided in terms of the permission time, but there's also an element of the build-out time. So I wonder if there's a bullet we can put in that says, actually, even if your permission is done here, anything built after the 27th of December 2030 has to meet the higher, even if the permission was sought on the transition, even if the permission was sought on the transition element.
I'd like to, but I don't think that's legal. I don't think we're able to do that.
I think we'll have a conversation though about how we might go around it. I think that helpful thought, that line of thought, that. Thank you. So I think we are ready for the next issue now, Martin.
Right, so I'm just resharing the presentation. So the next change, we had intended to move from BREEAM Excellent for our commercial developments to BREEAM Outstanding. And actually, the BRE group themselves have suggested that we wouldn't be able to deliver BREEAM Outstanding consistently in Leeds across all our commercial developments. And we've had significant responses from industry to say that there are very few cases of delivering this. It requires such optimum conditions to be able to achieve that actually the BREEAM Excellent as a minimum rating is one that's continued to be supported by BRE. And as you can see, it's only really been achieved by the top 1% of buildings. So that the other aspect of this is BRE came in with a sort of a late suggestion that we introduce a BREEAM communities rating. Now, a BREEAM communities rating applies more to master planning, very large scale sites. So I think it might be appropriate for us to sort of put something in the text or the policy that looks at the application of BREEAM communities, which I think would overlap with what the council would intend to do through its wider design coding anyway, which is going to become a requirement through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. So that would hopefully fit quite neatly with that. So that was the other change to the policy EN2.
So again, we'll pause for anybody who wants to comment on that particular issue. I don't see anybody indicating, Martin, so we can move on. Oh, sorry. Councillor Biffle.
Yeah, I just wondered, in terms of rather than getting rid of outstanding altogether, is there a wording that could be put in which is almost like when you're seeking applications from protected characteristics type thing, where you can, it's our aim to have more than 1%, so we'd really welcome development which does meet outstanding.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
Is that possible? Yeah.
We can do that.
Okay, that's good. Right.
So the other significant issue we've been dealing with is with Natural England, and it relates to the renewable energy policy, where we're looking to identify opportunity areas for solar and wind within the city, and the need to prepare a habitat regulation assessment, which is a legal document which has to accompany that policy. The Natural England objected to our policy and our assessment in the habitat regulations on the basis that whilst our assessment of where nesting birds were likely to be was correct, there is land just outside of where these birds nest, and this is specifically related to, there we go, the South Pennines moors, which actually facilitate the nesting activities of those birds. And these areas are called functionally linked land. So Natural England have asked us to take account of that functionally linked land when we look at the opportunity areas for solar. That's a reasonable suggestion, and it's one that we've taken on board and updated the policy. And we are also in the process of updating the habitat regulations assessment to reflect this updated policy. And that habitat regulations assessment will critically identify that the policy raises no likely significant effects on these particular areas of nature conservation. So that's the other change that we want to bring to your attention.
Anybody want to comment or question? No? We can move on.
Under policy G10, biodiversity enhancement, there's been quite a bit of change to the policy, really, as government guidance around biodiversity net gain has been released, because the Environment Act came out in 2021. So there's been quite a lot of supplementary guidance that's come out since then, which has clarified how local authorities are supposed to deliver biodiversity net gain. So we've taken that on board within the policy. So you'll see some changes to that. But a more substantive change is the introduction of a policy on nesting features for swifts and bats within major and minor development. And that's a policy that's commonly known as swift bricks. We've had some quite significant lobby from various groups within Leeds on that. And I think this is a real opportunity to sort of incorporate a species who's become a bit more naturalized to the built environment within new developments. So hopefully members will approve that change as well.
Everybody happy with that? Sorry. Okay, yeah, good.
Okay.
Move on.
The original policy where we were looking to introduce 20-minute neighbourhoods within the plan led to quite a lot of comment, most of it positive through the formal consultation period, but some negative outside of the consultation period. And actually, this the ambitions of the 20-minute neighbourhood to have places that operated more completely, that were dense and they were compact and they were highly connected so that people could walk and pursue active travel options between home and job and services, has developed through the Town and Country Planning Association. And a phrase that they use is complete, compact and connected places. Now, I don't think anyone can object to a complete, compact and connected place. So that's the terminology that we're hoping to go with when we're talking about walkable neighbourhoods.
Again, pause for reflection. Councillor Carlin, please.
That's fine, and that answers one of my questions, which was how would we chosen that title. I was just going to note that it's different than what we've chosen in the transport strategy, and I wondered whether we should align the two. But if it aligns with obviously something from the Town and Country Planning Association, then that fits us. The one thing that I think 20-minute neighbourhoods approach, the actual one, not the one some people think it brings in, that aims you towards, that doesn't seem to be expressly written. We've got reduce the need for the private car, but it's actually the reduction in the need to travel that is a key. And I'm not sure we expressly note that in the policy. Obviously, it is making a more connected place does imply that, but I think I would rather it was expressly there. It could be very connected if I could travel 4 miles on a very good bus route to get to a pharmacy, but it would be better connected if I could walk to my nearest district centre to get to it. So I think reducing the need to travel, I really would like to see in there somehow. And I just couldn't see that explicitly there. I know it is in the transport strategy that goes alongside this, but that is a key aim of the policy.
Thank you very much. Noted your comments, Councillor Carlin. Councillor Lamb.
So again, it's coming to sort of sitting in a plans panel when this isn't practical to be delivered. How are we going to address the policy when it says that's what has to happen and it can't happen?
Thanks, Councillor Lamb. So the policy is an ambition, and it sets out how we would like places to operate. We can only control that through the grant of planning permission. So we will expect developments that are happening within areas to help contribute to places becoming complete, compact and connected. And they can do that through a variety of different ways. It will also help when we are preparing Leeds Local Plan 2040, because it will help us respond to proposals for development and critically where they are within the city. And the complete, compact and connected places methodology will be used as we look to assess the desirability and the sustainability of those site options that are in front of us. So I think at the moment, the policy is really guidance for ourselves as we make Leeds Local Plan 2040. but can also be used where developments are generating things like commuted sums or a need for public transport infrastructure to also support those things being delivered.
Councillor Anderson.
What defence mechanisms do local residents have? Because it's fine having all of these policies, but as anybody who sits on a plans panel will tell you, not every application is totally policy compliant. Officers pick and choose which policies they are going to ask us to comply with. They'll often say it's not policy compliant on this, but on balance, we still recommend that the development goes forward for approval. Fine. We've then got to make the value judgment. Now, what happens if a planner comes along and says, well, we accept that policy SP1A, we aren't policy compliant in this development on this occasion, but because of blah, 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 this development becomes we've got to, how do you do that? And then what do residents do? Because residents are arguing we should, if a development's taking place, the infrastructure should be getting put in up front. You would disagree, I accept that, but residents are willing to accept and maybe consider development if the infrastructure is put in place. So where's the defense? How can we, I mean, maybe we might take control by then, but I very much doubt it, bring forward a policy that we can get our residents to buy into, because equally, I'm going to reverse my argument. There's going to be a lot of people totally happy with this, because I've had a lot of people contacting me to say that this 20-minute neighbourhood is overly prescriptive and people are trying to dictate how I'm going to run my life, etc., etc. So, but my main concern is policy compliance. Not all officers look upon each policy as needing to be policy compliant. What reassurance can you give me?
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. So this is an issue that we already have in the plan because the legislation says that the development plan is the primary consideration unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And it's those material considerations that will influence the balance that the determining officer will arrive at and ultimately recommend to plans panels. So this is no different really in terms of the way that we've worked with the policies that are already in the plan, and it certainly doesn't and can't take a precedence over other policies in the plan. What it does do is it sets out quite a clear approach to the spatial strategy which the council would now like to see moving forward, which, as I said, will influence the way in which the council prepares policies for Leeds Local Plan 2040, where we've got the opportunity to allocate land for housing. And we've got the opportunity through that plan to look at things like our local and town centres and how they operate. So I think we'll really see this strategic headline policy be implemented in quite a lot more detail through that process rather than through the grant of individual planning applications at the moment.
Slibithel.
Thank you. I guess it's how to explain it. A 20-minute neighbourhood is great, and I'm really happy with the change in title. I wonder if there's work to be done though around, I'll use the example of schools. So for me, if I walk to my kids' school, which I do most days twice, and then I have to get to work, well, what's my transport link like? It's all well and good it being a 20-minute neighbourhood, but actually if it's 15 minutes to my kids' school, 10 minutes back up the hill to the bus station to then get the bus into town because that's where I work. So I don't know how we do it in here, but actually it's also about the efficiency of those neighbourhoods and travelling between, because actually, and it has a real gender-based impact because of still the prevailing roles that different genders in society tend to fulfill. Actually, that moving within the neighbourhood tends to fall to women much more than it does to men. So yeah, I guess how can we make it as efficient as possible to move within to move within areas as well as to utilise the 20. I don't know if that's clear, but yeah.
I think that's right. I think that's what the policy's trying to achieve, because the policy will apply not only to new development, not only to the council as it prepares its local plan 2040, but also to our transport colleagues in terms of their priorities and how they roll out public transport infrastructure, so that we're actually making those join ups between that infrastructure, the place, the growth, the services, so that it is, as it says, more connected. So it does provide a sort of a framework under which I think a lot of different services and a lot of different actors in place can operate.
Do you want to come back?
I guess I feel like the theory is effective. I worry that the rollout of it might not have as strong an effect on our communities as we're hoping. So yeah, I guess it's about, as local members, or as a local member, me to be able to bring it up anytime I feel like actually there's some further work to be done. So maybe that resides with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb.
I think Councillor Brooks had a hand up before me.
Apologies, Councillor Brooks.
You such a gentleman, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I'm looking at the policy SP1A, and it's part like 8 under point 3. So it encourages mixed use and innovative and flexible design of buildings and spaces to provide multifunctional uses to facilitate thriving local economies and inclusion. I think it's just a little bit too sort of doughy. It needs tidying up and a bit more specific. So I was thinking something along the lines of, as well as that, but also provision of community centres, social infrastructure, seating areas for rest and socialising, that kind of thing, rather than it being, because that just wouldn't happen without specifying. Like things like community centres really important. Thank you.
Really helpful. We've taken notes on that, haven't we? Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This policy bothers me. I have to say, it's one of those policies which is what makes the public really frustrated with the planning process, because I look at that and think, I cannot think, unless you build an entirely new settlement somewhere in the city, I cannot think of a community in Leeds where that policy is deliverable in full. And you said it's an ambition rather than a policy, but again, I envisage sat in a planning committee in a few years' time, say, well, that's what the policy says. So, well, where are you going to put the green space? Where are you going to produce the local food in a landlocked city centre location? We know the mayor has been very explicit. Mass transit will not arrive in the outer northeast. There's no plan for it. It's not going to happen. So why have a policy that we know sat here now isn't deliverable and is going to frustrate the hell out of us when we're trying to hold developers to it? And as Councillor Anderson said, planners will say, well, we're in the planning balance, we've got to give more weight to that, and so we can't refuse planning consent because it can't be delivered, knowing we're writing a policy that can't be delivered.
I'd just pose a counter question to you. Do you want to impose this on every single development?
Well, that's what the policy's for, isn't it? That's why I'm saying the policy bothers me. I'm not saying whether I do or I don't. I'm saying it's a policy that's not deliverable.
Okay.
But we're still proposing it as a policy.
David.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, just a few observations. I think the policy is trying to do a number of things, isn't it? It's trying to apply itself to existing places, and where we get applications within those places, trying to stitch in the new development to those existing places as best we can in terms of making sure that they are connected and meet those social and environmental requirements as far as practicable. You know, they might not be able to do all of those things, but as far as we can, through the lens of that policy, try to have more cohesive communities within existing places so they feel part of that community and they're stitched in. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is, as Martin was outlining before, with regard to our Leeds 2040 plan and the choices that we will have to make about the allocation of land for future housing needs, etc., this policy helps to set some strategic and land use parameters as to which of those choices best fit and have the best potential to enable us to apply this policy. So I think there are a number of applications to it. I accept that in the first instance, existing places and new development, yeah, that is a challenge, isn't it? You can't re-engineer everything all at the same time. But what we can do is to try and assimilate new development more seamlessly, if that's possible, within those communities by trying to influence decisions about investment and infrastructure and all the rest of it. So, you know, it's serving a positive purpose in trying to do that. But I think in terms of the site selection process and trying to guide development of new allocations, particularly where we're putting site requirements to those allocations, it's possible that at that stage we can emphasize as part of those requirements particular things if that draws out these requirements more explicitly. So I think, you know, it's a tool to that future as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Anderson.
Mr. Feeney saying that this test will be black and white when it comes to site allocations, that if it's not possible to put all the local infrastructure that is needed for a development, it will be put in as a red site and will not be taken forward under any circumstances? Or are you going to say that you'll use a degree of flexibility to assess the site? So in other words, because residents need to know, right, what criteria their site is being allocated against, so that residents and other people believe that this type of infrastructure is needed in this area. If you disagree with that, and or even more importantly, if a neighbourhood plan is trying to identify sites to be put in, and they feel that something's not within close by and fits this criteria, are they entitled to say no development in this area because this village, you just cannot produce this? Are you saying that that's black and white, or does it still come down to officer interpretation of it?
Yeah, I think what the policy does, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Lamb, is it pulls together quite a number of new and existing policies within the plan on accessibility, on green space, on services, on local centres, to try to come up with a coherent ambition about places. Now, we're not going to meet that ambition everywhere because we're building on quite a already existing complex tapestry within Leeds. But where we have the opportunity to do that, we should go for it. And this policy helps us to achieve that. This policy also helps local people think about how they would like their place to develop, and it will be relevant to them as they grapple with some of those issues. But it's not written as a black and white refuse or accept policy. It's rather written as a defining what a complete, compact and connected place looks like that we will aspire to. And I think just the debates we're having today, whilst that's okay, because I understand that members are obviously had some feedback from local people about how they want to use the policy. We're not asking to change the overall intent of this policy. The changes to this policy through the pre-submission changes are actually quite minor. So the policy is already being accepted by Executive Board as a policy to be published as part of the Leeds local plan update. And that intent really hasn't changed. It's really talking about some of the sort of minor wording of the policy. But we can take on board some of the concerns that you have about how this policy is being seen. But there's nothing in the wording of the policy that should lead local people to think that they can use it quite absolutely in the way that you're suggesting.
So accepting that, you produced a diagram, a map showing roughly 20-minute neighbourhoods around various, you did circles, concentric circles, etc., etc. Is that map being redrawn as a result of this policy suggestion, or can residents rely on that map as being definitive?
So that map will help inform the implementation of the policy. Its chief value will come through the Leeds Local Plan 2040, where, as in line with a number of other considerations, we will take into account the merits of places as complete, compact and connected.
Councillor Carlisle next, and I'll bring Councillor Lamb in afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been round this a few times though, haven't we? And I think I've accepted in this that this isn't a policy we can, through the arrangement that we're going through now, this isn't a policy that we can put in the way that we would like it, that it required these facilities to be there, because obviously we have allocated sites. And when I think of one of these, one of the sites that I think of is one in your ward that I had a struggle with, that it's 20 minutes to the edge of Wetherby, but I very much doubt any of those things are in 20 minutes. I think the school was slightly outside, wasn't it? But that site is allocated and therefore that will go ahead. The main thing, I think the power that gives this is windfall developments that may come in, because by my understanding, if somebody wanted to put that next to a village with no facilities at the moment, we would be able to say quite rightly, well, there's nothing in that village of services for the people that live there already. This is just going to make lots of car journeys somewhere else. So I get that bit. In a way, I mean, I have a couple of villages that are perfect 20-minute neighbourhoods, and it may lead to a handful of houses going into the middle of Farsley because it does have everything that you would need. That adds pressure onto it, but unfortunately we can't look at that pressure necessarily through this. That's when we get to the site allocation process, which will go into the next plan, which I think is where we can look at what that land use is. What we can't say is next to a small village, and I won't name one because it's always bad to name one, but next to a small village, maybe there should be somewhere for people to work. Maybe there should be some commercial land that's set aside there, but at the moment we don't have that. So I think we know that, I know that this isn't going to be black and white, but it does give that intent of where we want to go. And I think that is quite valuable to have, really, especially when all the conversations around. And yeah, some sites are already allocated. We can't make a judgment because they are allocated and they've been proved to be sustainable in a way. I think we're just slightly tweaking the wording of what sustainable is, my understanding. But yeah, unfortunately, it can't be quite a solid. We can't say you have to open a doctor's surgery in East Keswick, for instance. That's not something we are able to do.
Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's perhaps the language in the consultation and perhaps the language of the policy that suggests to people, if you're getting a development, you should expect these things. Actually, I think it needs to be honest in the consultation. Say, just because that's what it says doesn't mean that's what you get. And to use the example you had, we did ignore, it's no secret, I did not want Racecourse Approach to be allocated in Wetherby. My view was, and according to the core strategy, it wasn't an accessible location, wasn't a sustainable location, but that didn't defend us, even though it didn't meet the accessibility standards. We're going to be in the same boat when it comes to allocating sites and approving developments going forward. And I think the language just needs to be honest and upfront that this is what we'd like all our neighbours to be like, but they won't all be like that.
I agree with that point completely. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, we can have a think about that, and we can maybe put some wording in to qualify that, Councillor Lamb. Just to say on the use of this policy, we will be holding a workshop with development plan panel on site assessment criteria. That's probably going to be programmed in the new year now. So there will be an opportunity for members to understand how we use this proposed policy. Yeah. So just finally, really, those were the sort of the key policies that I thought members would want me to draw their attention to. There's just a couple of other little tidying up points. The first relates to the emerging place efficiency strategy that we have within the council. And the use of that phrase place efficiency, I think is quite important, because it really sets out and captures an understanding of opportunities for children to be able to play within the built and the natural environment. It's not just about children's play. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to amend the current policy that we have, our policy G4 on green space, to include the word sufficiency after play, and also to reflect place efficiency within our placemaking policy. Both policies currently refer to play, but just to be absolutely sure that we are linked in right the way across the council with other strategies that are emerging, and that place efficiency strategy will go to exec board in December. So I think hopefully those 2 points will be valuable. And finally, just to let members know that there are still some maps to be added to the tables that will go out to publication. We weren't able to produce them in time for today's meeting, and those maps will be a more detailed OS base layer of the Leeds Habitat Network, the Green and Blue Infrastructure Network, long established woodland, and the renewable energy opportunity areas, because these are designations that we're proposing to put on the policies map, will therefore put more definitive maps within the consultation. And that hopefully is all I have on the local plan update papers.
Councillor Carlile.
Thank you, Chair. The only thing I noted that we haven't added, and I don't know whether it's too late to do that, is obviously the new thing we've got is the Leeds City Bikes hire scheme. There's discussion around mass transit, there's discussion around bus, there's discussion around other things, but I would hope we'll be developing something a mile out of the city centre. We may be able to have a policy that required them to put in a bike hire station as well as we have the car club, etc. I don't know whether that'd have to come through this or whether that's something we could update in one of the other transport policies, sorry, but that looks like something that was a gap.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Carlile. I will have a look and understand, because I suspect we've probably got policies that can cover that. I think that's an implementation issue rather than an uppercase policy issue. And certainly there's lots of things happening, but if we include them all, we make the plan very large, or actually sometimes we make the plan quite out of date quite quickly. So but I think I'll get back to you on the ability to be able to secure that through the policies we've got.
Thank you, Peter. Can I ask members to look at page 11 then, where we've got the recommendations for this paper? So if you want to assist us, Martin, endorse and recommend to Executive Board the proposed pre-submission draft changes and supporting paragraphs of the local plan update 1 as set out in Appendix 1, and the schedule of changes in Appendix 2, and the sustainability appraisal as set down in Appendix 3, which you outlined at the beginning was the structure of the papers we have. Do I have a proposer for that? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Carlile.
I was going to comment, sorry, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously, Martin made a number of suggestions of changes to the policy through that, changing the date, adding others. Can I take it that these recommendations include all of those changes that have been discussed? And is there something we need to do to propose that in the recommendations so that we know that will go forward?
So if I can, might be helpful to members if I run through those. So for policy EN1B, that's changing the date to the 1st of January 2027 and removing the words be expected to. For policy EN2 sustainable construction standards, that's adding something about encouraging outstanding BREEAM, as well as conforming to the minimum rating of BREEAM. For G4, it's adding wording around place efficiency, and for the placemaking policy, P10, I think, that's adding a reference to place efficiency. And then for SP1B, the connected compact communities, that's adding wording to the justification about the intent of the policy and how it will be used. Those were the changes that I had. Sorry, SP1A. Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
I think Councillor Carlyle was referring to changes we may have discussed in addition to those that were already being proposed, or refinements of language, etc. Is that what you were referring to? Although that covers what we've said. Okay.
Changes to the changes, Chair, I
Okay,
think.
that's fine. So do I have a proposer for that recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Akhtar. Did you want to say something, Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, thanks. I didn't hear anything about, social infrastructure.
That's reflecting in policy SP1A, criteria 2, number 8, about community facilities and community centres, and that may be via a change to the supporting text, or that may be via a change to the policy. We'll have a think about that if that's okay.
Okay, so do I have a proposer for that? Thank you, Councillor Akhtar, and a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Biffle. All those in favour? You're doing the counting for me. Those against? Any abstentions? So that is approved. Second part of the recommendation. Do you want to take us through that? Recommend to Executive Board that they approve the 6-week consultation and the supporting paragraphs as set down in the appendices.
That's correct, Chair. So it's approval of the documentation itself and those changes that we've just gone through, and then it's approval of the actual consultation period, which will be 6 weeks and will include the main material plus all the appendices that you have within the bundle.
Can I have a proposer for that? Sorry. Can I have a proposer for that recommendation? Okay, Councillor Lamb.
Can we take it as read? There'll be a plain English version, because there's a lot of information here for people to absorb, which is needed. But will there be a simple form so that people can actually get to grips with it?
Yeah, as part of the consultation material, we'll be really clear as to what parts of this document are now open again for consultation and why we've chosen to do that, so that people understand the nature of the consultation.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Lamb? Okay. Do I have a proposer, please, for that part of the recommendation? Councillor Carlyle, and a seconder, please. Councillor Akhtar. All of those in favour? That is unanimously approved. Thank you very much indeed. Would you like a 5-minute comfort break before the next paper? Or are you okay to march on? Councillor Lamb?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, I've been slightly hasty. I would like to record an abstention on that vote, given that I'll be on the Executive Board when this is considered.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so I'm going to take that as an indication we'll march straight on with the next item. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So this relates to a consultation from government as part of its planning reforms and the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and it specifically relates to changes that are being proposed around plan making. Happy to hand over to. Oh, you haven't got a card. Do you want me just to?
Is it? Oh.
All right, fine. Do you want me to just kick off?
Yeah.
So this is in relation. Oh, it's here. Yep, I'll hand over to Sarah, who prepared the report.
It's a while since I've done this. Sorry, it's a few months. Afternoon, members. Martin and I have prepared this report, but Chair, if it's okay, because we weren't sure how long the first agenda would go on for our item, that would just do a really short introduction. I think we'll take the report as read, as we've written it, and then maybe go straight to the points raised, questions and comments, if that's okay. So this paper is on the government's consultation on the implementation of plan making reforms as part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. I think that's quite important to emphasise that it is part of that bill, but also links to the wider part of the wider planning reform since the planning white paper from 2020 onwards, and we've got a number of ones all out at the moment. So the report highlights key points from the consultation, includes vision, plan content vision, shorter and simpler, timeframes, front-loading the process, consultations and accessibility of information, monitoring and digitalisation. And as noted in the report, there's a lot in this consultation, and that comments raised previously on many of the other consultations have been taken on board. So we feel that progress has been made and consideration has been taken into account of our comments and other authorities and stakeholders' comments. The proposals are broadly welcomed, but some specific points raise concerns, and that's in our overall conclusion. And that this consultation does form part of the bigger reforms, and it's important that the wider picture and details is understood for us all to go forward. Very short and sweet, Chair, but there we are.
Very short and sweet. Do I have anyone wishing to comment or question on this paper, please? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
I have concerns at trying to do this in 30 months, because just look at us here today and all the processes we've done, and we are only a small part of, I know, but the point is, by the time you go out and reconsult, and if we've got our own community involvement consultation documents, which, you know, you've not said you're going to repeal that. So in other words, that's already set out. So we're going to have to go back and talk to our communities. I have real concerns that trying to do it within 30 months will be up against it. But I, you know, that's what the government have said, but I would agree that it is, because particularly if we are genuine about consulting with communities, and what we're now on the previous paper, we're now in our third or fourth iteration, isn't it? So if you see what I mean, that all adds to the time. And the more complicated it becomes, which it will do, we might need more iterations. You know, fine, you might start off with 100 proposals, and by the time you're on your 6th or 7th down, you're down to only 3 proposals that you're consulting on. But I don't know how we get that message across, but I do think that and how we keep our SCI in place are the 2 concerns that I've got.
Yeah, well, as you can see from the paper, officers share your view on the timescale. Would either of you like to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Anson. It's good to hear that we've sort of got the same sort of initial feelings, and I think obviously there has been some tweaks since the previous consultation, but obviously from our experience of local plans, it's not a short and sweet process, is it? So I think that we are raising that, and I think this is the issue about the complexities of the issues of local authorities across the county, across the country, but not also the county really. So I think it's how we phrase it and how we say that we have concerns about going forward for 31, because obviously stage 1 in the time frame that they're given in figure 1, actually the scoping actually hasn't got a time limit on, which I think is quite an interesting point, because that could be, you know, how long's a piece of string? So it's getting that, it's the early stages, but that actually isn't counted as part of the 30-month plan. So the scoping, early scoping is before we get to stage 1. So that's a timetable. And I think that's something we maybe need to refer back to the government in our response, that, you know, because they may suddenly come back and say, actually, that's got to be done within a period of time. And obviously the way we do our consultation and engagement at Leeds and the scoping, you know, it's very thorough and we do extra. So I think that needs to be something we need to raise and make sure that we are taking into account how we engage and consult, but also they're proposing a project, I can never say it, project initiation document. Got so used to saying SCI, and I think that's a clarification we need. Does the SCI still remain? is this a separate document? They have to be tied in, or will it not be tied in, or will one go? Because obviously SEI is very important, and it's not just about plan making, it's about decision making and how we advertise and how we engage. So I think there's lots of little detail. I think that's the biggest overall outcome, is there's still a lot of detail that's not, and they talk about new regs coming out and how we look at stuff and how it fits in with the wider planning reforms, which we still don't have all the information.
Just one quick thing. Am I right in thinking this is just purely making what we will call our core plan? It doesn't include trying to do site allocations plan, because at the moment the site allocations plan isn't necessarily being held up because of the council, shall we say. And that's taken ages to get through.
No, this would cover all development plan documents, Councillor Anderson. So it would include the site allocations plan, but it is silent on neighbourhood planning.
Shall we say that other players who may have a role to play, if we can put it as nicely as that?
No, I suppose the only thing just to add to Sarah's comments is that we've made the point in here that if the government's ambition is for 30 months, which we do think is unreasonable, but if even it's going to be 40 months or 50 months, there is a need to properly and adequately resource planning departments in order to achieve that, because it's the bits of the process that are the most time consuming are the bits where we engage either with the public or with developers or different bodies. But also, not only do they need to equip us to do that, but people like the planning inspectorate and the statutory bodies that we engage with also need to be equipped to do that as well, through no fault of their own, because they've got their own resources to deal with. But it has taken us nearly 6 months to engage with 2 statutory bodies on the process of the local plan update. So you go at the pace of the slowest part of that plan. So there are quite a few wider issues, I think, for the government to think about.
Think other councils will feel the same way, and that we might actually get some change?
I think that'd be interesting discussion through the duty to cooperate. I don't know if it's been discussed yet, Martin, but I think that might be a good one to bring up with our colleagues at other authorities.
Yeah, from what I understand, certainly within the region, most planners feel the same way, and the national events that I've attended on this, the comments all seem to be very similar. In the 30 months, does it? I think there's a lot of good in this consultation, and I think there's a lot of sense in this consultation, but I think unfortunately the 30 months has sort of distracted people from focusing on what's really good, and they've sort of landed on well, that's just not achievable.
I may say I should have read all of this thoroughly, the government consultation, but what are the sanctions if you don't do it within 30 months?
That's it is raised in the report, which I've read many times now, but there is they say that this is the point of the gateways. So the gateways are supposed to be helpful in making sure they're in the right direction, so we don't, in some cases previously, have gotten to the point of going to examination and there's problems, or new things are raised, or changes to housing numbers. So the gateways are supposedly a point of making sure we're on the right track, and we've raised the issue that really should be also the same inspector or inspectors, so we've got the full consistency, so not a different, a view is slightly different, but in the circumstances we don't know if they've said that should be, it's a stop or go is gateway 3. So basically we either know everything's okay, or we're ready to rock and roll, so to speak, as going to examination. So but we have asked more clarity on what those issues may be and what could be a problem, but theoretically, in the way it's set out, that shouldn't really happen theoretically if everything goes to that plan.
Councillor Bithell, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, couple. I'm just for clarification for me, and just a nod or not. The overall conclusion section of the report is what we're actually going to send in to the consultation. Is that right? Or
it's the italicized text, Councillor Bithell. So after each section, there is an underlined heading which says matters to consider in the council's consultation response, and there's an italicized sort of A through. That's what we'll send in response to the questions. It might not read quite like that, which is why it says matters to consider. So it's just really for your understanding that that's the tone of the comments so far.
Okay, great. So I guess most of what I was going to ask them, because it wasn't included in that overall conclusions, I was like, actually, we do need to put some, but that very much solves that, which makes this a lot quicker. What I haven't seen, I don't think, within the report is what we as a city would want the time limit to be, in a very similar way to what we've said about the developers not giving her what we want. I worry we're also not giving her what we want.
Very good point, Councillor Bithell. I'm sure that's an addition that could be made.
I think it is, Councillor Bithell.
Sarah's nodding.
I'd really not like to say what that should be. I mean, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. I mean, the core strategy took about 4 years. Then the site allocations plan took 7, and it still isn't quite finished because we've got a remittal. The Air Valley plan took about 3, and the core strategy selective review took about 2. So it's given the complexity and the scale of Leeds, and given the issues that we face, it's really hard to sort of define what an ideal time might be. And on the plans that have taken us the longest, like the site allocations plan, for example, a lot of that was out of our hands. So a lot of that was national guidance changing overnight and us not knowing about it.
Yeah, do come back, Councillor Bithell.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. In terms of the stuff that's out of our hands, have the government given any indication of whether time when it's not in our hands will come out of the 30? Because sometimes what they do is they kind of cancel the clock while it's with inspectorate or whatever, and then when it comes back, it restarts the timer.
My understanding is that it's to stick to exactly what it says in figure 1. So unless they say the issue is, and we don't know enough depth about what at Gateway 1, when they say, oh, actually, no, you can't, you've got to go back and do some work. So the understanding, I suppose, would be that stops the clock. But I think we need much more detail on that and the actual ins and outs of how those work. So it could be on hold for a long time, but we have asked, though, that is part of the questioning of going back to government, is what does that actually mean? And what if there are issues?
I think Martin wants to respond as well.
Just to say what hopefully helps is we have suggested in this response that at Gateway 3, which is the last one before it goes in front of an inspector, we have a conversation with government, and we say these are the issues, this is the extent of where we are. We think it'll take another 10 months, 18 months, not 3 months, and then have an agreement with government in terms of that process.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah, just one final one, please. In terms of the gateways, obviously, well, I say obviously, I might actually be wrong, but at the moment we don't do sort of the gateway process. So how much extra time are the gateways going to add, which then takes out of the 30 months, which is already unrealistic? Or do we not know that because we don't know exactly what it will involve yet?
I think the gateways are designed to front load and de-risk the process. So I think in the government's mind, the gateways, getting you in front of an inspector early, will be the inspector saying, you're going overboard with your evidence on this, or I can understand that this is going to take a bit longer on another aspect of it. So I think what they're trying to do is get that sort of consistency and get the inspector in at an earlier point in the process, so that you haven't spent 5 years on something, hand it over to inspector, and the inspector says, well, you went wrong 3 years ago. So I think it's about trying to sort of get that front loading. So in theory, it should speed the process up rather than slow it down.
Councillor Brooks, please.
Thank you. Yeah, SPDs. I'm a bit unclear as to what's going to be happening with SPDs, and how is a supplementary plan any different from an SPD? I don't understand.
Very good point, Councillor Brooks. obviously, I think sort of reading between the lines, their intention for new supplementary plans is that they form part of the local plan. And I think that's the key. The weight is there. So obviously at the moment, supplementary planning documents they don't have as much weight, their guidance. And so I think everything expected to go through the whole plan process collectively. The only exception they're talking about is when we're doing authority-wide, so the design codes that we assume coming in, sort of has been talked about through consultations. But that's a question we're quite keen to understand, because sometimes the technical guidance does help, in implementation or clarification. And obviously sometimes we use updated evidence that comes through just to adopt a little bit quicker and make changes when changes come through from government or circumstances change. So we are seeking to ask that question in 33A and B, that we want a bit more clarity on what does the present roles, and is there a transition period? Because they've provided a transition period for obviously the plan making process, but they haven't provided those sorts of details on the transition for us in the stage that we should hopefully be at when this comes in. So what will happen to our SPDs? And that's a question that we want clarification on.
Okay. Councillor Dye, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the use of digital as opposed to any other ways of consulting with people. And I see that you've made a comment in there. I share that concern, but I wondered if you'd had any indication of what that might look like. When it says in the digital plan section that plans will make best use of modern technology and be produced digitally rather than analog, any indication of what that's likely to look like?
I mean, I think it's fair to say we've been trying to do that a lot already. So our call for sites on our local plan 2040, for example, was done online, and we were encouraging people to select sites, identify them, draw them, and submit them online. That saves a lot of our resource and it saves a lot of our time. We also try and encourage a lot of the consultation, toing and froing, to happen digitally online, either through videos that we've done or online events. But also key to that is receiving comments online, because if we receive handwritten comments, there's an extra period of time needed to decipher those comments and to actually log them onto our system. And when we're dealing with sort of 25,000 comments like we dealt with through the site allocations plan, that creates significant delays to the plan making process. So I think the government's intention is to simplify, make more relevant to local people. Local people are used to going on to websites, navigating around their locality, clicking on things to find out information about things. So that's the way the government wants the planning system to work.
Can I just come back and say, but we need to recognise that that's not all local people. And one of the things we did do with the local plan update was went out to places, didn't we, to libraries and places where people could walk in and physically see something. And I think we need to be aware of that as well.
Is that the intention, that there would be a variety of different approaches? Because depending on where you are in the city, does rather depend on the level that people are digitalised to, the number of people who have the necessary equipment. Some people would prefer face-to-face, etc. Is there going to be a mix?
I'm not getting the impression that that's where the government wants this to land, because I think they've heard that public consultation is one of the key bits of the plan making process that takes the largest amount of time. They've responded to that by saying, if we digitize that aspect of plan making, then it'll speed things up. But what they haven't done is said that there should be a variety of techniques and methods to engage. But what they have done, to be fair, is to suggest that we do a lot more front loading of the process. And I think they're also thinking that things like visualizing what new development looks like, and being able to articulate what development sites look like when they're built out, rather than sort of as a line on a plan, would also be helpful to that. But we've gone back and said, even though you want us to do this digitally, there's still going to be a lot of engagement, and we need to hear what people say, react to it, and feed it back to them.
Are there any further comments? Councillor Anderson.
Neighbourhood plans, assuming that we all believe in them and we start building from neighbourhood plans up the way, as Mr. Mackay will attest, it takes a heck of a lot more than 30 months to get a neighbourhood plan through for a start. And if you go back to some communities and say, right, these are our broad structures that we Leeds are wanting to change, and that then has a knock-on effect on them, it might take them a few years in order to get their suggested changes to the neighbourhood plans to conform with your proposed, because my understanding is that neighbourhood plans need to conform with the generality of the council's proposals. That will add. So I don't know how they're going to deal with that if you really do honestly believe that neighbourhood plans are the #1 building block and you build up from that. But just making an observation. That's...
Do you want to reflect on that observation?
It was something I picked up and I have made note of. Apologies, it's not in the report, but I do think that's important, and that's the point about the wider reforms. And this obviously links to the Levelling Up Bill and Regeneration Bill, but we've got lots of other reforms going on and quite a few out, and lots of stuff's gone on. So I think that's how we understand how that works in conjunction. Or is it part of? We haven't got that, so that is something we will be, as part of the wider. We want to understand a bit more detail on how it syncs or not, as the case may be.
Anybody got any further questions or comments? Okay, so can I point you then to the recommendation on page 827 of your pack? So we're noting the contents of the report and providing comments for the council's consultation response, which basically means we are asked to agree the stuff that's written in italics in the body of the report. Could I have a proposer, please, for that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Biffle, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Carlisle. All of those in favour? Abstentions? Sorry, those against? Abstentions? That is approved. Thank you very much indeed. You look as if you're going to say something, Barry.
In the past, people like me have had to chase up planning for copies of submissions that they've made in our name. Can this one be sent to us automatically without us having to request it? Because it gets a bit, because we get residents saying, what did the council say? I don't know. I was at development plans panel, we discussed it, and we then deferred it effectively to officers to conclude it on our part. So it just dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
Thank you very much for that. So we now move on to the final item, which is to note the date of the next meeting, which hasn't changed, has it, Martin?
No.
No, it hasn't. That's good. Okay, do you want to summarise anything or conclude?
No, just to say, Chair, that either myself or my colleague Caroline Harris will be emailing you to seek your availability for some workshops around Leeds Local Plan 2022 to 2040. We hope to get 4 in before Christmas and then 1 in the new year. So if you could respond with your availability, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's completes the meeting. Thank you very much for your contributions this afternoon and for your attendance. Thank you.